views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day. This is Archie Jennings on behalf of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands, presenting to you Ability Radio with my colleague and advocate, Shammi, Carr. We're here this morning to talk about, or today, the National Disability Employment and Awareness Month for employers. Good day, Shammi.
Good day, Archie.
Okay.
Glad to join you talking about a good topic for October.
Great. And just as an intro, we want to make sure you understand that Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands is a nonprofit, non-governmental agency that provides advocacy and resources on issues of disability. Their local office on St. Croix is located on Centerline Road, west of the old Kmart building. On St. Thomas is in the Haven site. The contact number for St. Croix is 772-1200. For St. Thomas is 776-4303. We provide resources and information for people to advocate for disability. And just to start off, I want to say thank you for 21 years of working at Disability Rights Center. It was brought in by Amelia Haley-Lamont, the longtime director of the agency. And Shammi, I want to thank you for participating and being a part of the project. And I have to say goodbye to you probably in the next month or so, but it's been great working with you. With that being said, we want to talk about national disability employment. And really, this is a subject matter that during the 20th century led veterans to address disability issues through passing a policy and issues first after the First World War, and then after World War II expanded it. The actual Office of Disability Employment was started in 1945 originally, and then 1962 it expanded to reflect all disabilities, and the celebration itself was expanded from 1 week to 1 month in 1988. What are some of just to give an overview, what are some of the policies addressed by the Office of Disability and Employment? Shammi?
Well, and thank you again, Archie, for that nice welcoming. And of course, talking about disability employment is very near dear to my heart. I've been doing it for almost 20 plus years. And talking about ending the National Disability Employment Awareness Month is something that we do annually, whether it's here in the territory, nationally, and of course, federally. And one of the main things for ODEP, the Office of Disability Employment Policy, is to be able to provide resources for employers. So one of their biggest partners is called EARN, which is an employer assistance program that really can help employers understand not just disability in the context of diversity, but also different policies having to do with strategic planning, having to do with reasonable accommodation. And I think I know one of the most difficult laws to implement for employers is the Americans with Disabilities Act, particularly Title I, the employment provision. EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, has said that, all the way down to local employers who say they struggle with it. And so ODEP really provides a nice repository for employers, whether it's practice or policy, to be able to implement a law truly that is one of the most complicated. And again, that's some of the reasons why we all have our jobs, so that we can help employers along with resources with ODEP, but then talk to them locally about issues that they're dealing with, whether it's current employees or prospective employees.
And how do you go about assisting the employers? I know, having been in union work, we used to give workshops with the union and management in order to have all employees be on the same plate when addressing issues at work. What is the approach given to employers under this government agency?
In terms of, again, the resources, which there's so many of them under ODEP, and then of course under even EEOC has resources for employers. Many a times employers only see EEOC as a punitive measure or some sort of complaint driven. And the bottom line is that it's also a resource for employers, meaning that there's enforcement guidance, there's different types of practice with reasonable accommodation. As an example, which leads us right up until, the pandemic was, again, as an example, that EEOC put out enforcement guidance about telework. Now, most times people were not even paying any mind to telework as a form of reasonable accommodation. They didn't think it was feasible. They also were worried about things like the woodwork effect, like now everybody else is going to want it. And this was back in 2003. So it's been over 20 years this enforcement guidance has been out. But now with the pandemic, it's brought it right front and center. So that's just an example of how EEOC, some of their guidance, it might have been written in the past, but then it catches up with what's going on now. In terms of another great resource, and again, this is funded by ODEP, which is the Job Accommodation Network. Now, this is what I call a practice repository, meaning that there's information in there that is all about implementing where the rubber hits the road. And I'm, as a disability advocate, I'm even blown away with the amount of information that's in there, but it's so well organized that I let employers know all the time, you don't have to know every disability. I don't know every disability, and I've been in this 20 plus years, but Jan has a database that has over 80 different disabilities and reasonable accommodation brochures, and they are written in layman's term. And they're very easy to follow along, both for employees and employers, because again, we share this with both parties. And for employers, it just gives them another resource where they don't always have to necessarily run to go pay someone as a consultant or to go pay legal fees to help an attorney figure this out of what's reasonable accommodation, where they simply go and use some of these resources as kind of a preemptive measure to be able to then say, okay, now I understand what this disability means in the context of work and so forth. And you also have issues of employers who have people who have disabilities who didn't start the job with a disability. You have people who've acquired disability through disease, accidents, and so forth. Even they have information about practices of returning to work. Jan has a brochure on return to work. So again, the ODEP has provided so many great resources, whether it's in-house, meaning on their website, or that they outsource that they work with, such as Jan and Earn, to be able to provide those more high level, what I say, technical assistance. And the best part about all of this, it's free to the employers. So if they really want to get their hands around, all right, let me understand ADA, what are the resources? What are the policies? They can definitely, go to ODEP. They can go to Jan, they can go to Earn, and right there will give them so much just to start the conversation. And to bring it back a little bit locally, you had mentioned about doing workshops. One thing that certainly DRCVI does in collaboration with our partner, our affiliates in the Northeast ADA Center, is we also help to train employers down here and making sure they understand things like disclosure and reasonable accommodation, undue hardship, and also some of the incentives that are move forward their recruitment efforts for people with disabilities in the islands. So that's something, in a nutshell, that employers can start to tap into, whether it's nationally or locally, and be able to start moving that needle forward for people with disabilities.
And you touched on a good thing about employers and having the job accommodation network available to them right on the internet and for free. Mm-hmm. Is the issue that people do get injured at work. So many times when I was in private practice, something along the lines of workman's comp or workman's comp claim would roll over to become a disability claim after, depending on the type of injury and how the matter is addressed. Many times, or most times, persons want to return to work, and employers are kind of reluctant unless they get a clearer picture that the person could complete the work that they were previously doing. They have to be qualified to perform the job functions. That's one of the other aspects, is making sure employers understand that. Without a clear job description, many times they get into return to work disputes. But having the EEOC available, having government pages under the ADA, they can sort of follow the outline given for reasonable accommodations to help and assist an employee to return to work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And one of my favorite documents is the reasonable accommodation under EEOC. It's again written in layman's term, but it's comprehensive. It's a maybe 20-page document plus, and it's something that an employer can really, if they're unsure of exactly the intricacy of reasonable accommodation, this brochure will absolutely make sure they know comprehensively in a non-technical form to be able to make sure that they're staying in compliance, because certainly they have responsibilities under the ADA. And it's kind of ironic because here in the Virgin Islands, when we talk about who has responsibility, there's about, give or take, 2,500 businesses/employers, and only about 500 of them have obligation, which means that's 15 or more employees. And so even that's still, that's still a big number to be able to help educate and bring awareness about the benefits of hiring people with disabilities. And so in terms of those types of outreach, not only in terms of us collaborating, meaning DRCVI, with such entities as Department of Labor, Vocational Rehab, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but then also spinning off of that, saying, oh, okay, well, Department of Labor, maybe they don't have someone who has a disability background to outreach, but since we're partnering with them, it gives us entree then to talk to the employers, because the bottom line is that there's some myths that, like, and you had mentioned one of them already, is that, and unfortunately there's a myth that continues to be pervasive right now in America, is that you can be a diverse background and not have to have merit to get the job. And that is absolutely false. Per the ADA, you have to meet both definitions. You have to meet the definition of disability, and you have to qualify for the job. So we want to be very, very clear that these people who are getting back in, what we used to call DEI, were getting jobs because they were merited. They had the credentials to be able to move forward. And the ADA is very specific about that. So we don't want employers to think that this is just a nice to do. This is work. This is business necessity. And we need to have a pool of talent that includes people with disabilities who do have those credentials. And so that's one thing we always try to break down in terms of diversity in the workplace, including disability, is letting folks know, employers know, you're going to get a qualified individual because they have met the credentials to even be able to qualify for the job. So again, locally, we have our own issues opposed to nationally, and we can talk about some of those resources as well for them, as well as for the job seekers that's here in all three islands.
Well, one more thing about before you move on the EEOC side, employers, you don't be afraid to use them because they have a mediation service. So even though there might be some blockages and resolving issues about return to work, and the employee may file an EEOC claim. The first step is EEOC will pay for it to have a mediation, and therefore it may help straighten out that situation without any other legal recourse or having to go any further. But that's something that also goes forward on the workman's comp side. You can also ask for mediation, and usually if it's already a union shop, you can do it through arbitration, and mediation is usually in most contracts as you go forward. One of the things you talk about resources. So what are the resources for employees in order to return to work?
Okay, so we'll talk about the employees or job seekers with disabilities in terms of looking to either initiate work or return to work. And here in the Virgin Islands, we do have some, and I want to make sure that people know, the listening audience knows about these different resources. So one of them, of course, is vocational rehab. Vocational rehabilitation is a federal program, and it is to serve people just with disabilities who have an employment barrier. There are some people who have disabilities who don't qualify because their disability doesn't affect them for employment. So it's a very specific definition for them to be able then to be eligible. One thing that DRCVI does is we help job seekers who are looking to return to work or initiate work by assisting them by understanding the VR process, any issues or complaints, that they can talk to us about that so that we can help them move forward with the VR, because the VR is a wonderful system. There's two public workforces in America. We've got, of course, Department of Labor, but then also VR is a second public workforce. And so many a times we're helping employees or job seekers to bring those two public workforce together so they have a better chance of an employment outcome. So Voc Rehab is one. Department of Labor, as I just mentioned, is another one. And because Department of Labor has their own mandates, they do work with people with disabilities. So if you have a disability and you go to labor, and you may not need the more intensive service, such as vocational rehab, you can still be a person with a disability and be enrolled in labor and work with them. So that's absolutely always an option. I tell people, and including the people that we train, including labor staff, that everybody needs to stay duly enrolled because it only enhances the opportunities for people with disabilities. And it only shows that it took a team, and everybody gets credit for that team to have such a great employment outcome. And then another program I want to mention is Ticket to Work. Now, Ticket to Work is a program just for folks who are beneficiaries of Social Security related to disability. Of course, in the Virgin Islands, we only have Social Security disability insurance, SSDI, and we have about 1,200 plus folks in the territories. So we do have a handful that could possibly benefit from a program called Ticket to Work. And Ticket to Work is a voluntary program. We have actually a benefits advisor that works with us out of Puerto Rico. She obviously speaks Spanish as well, so we can serve the Spanish population related to these issues of return to work while you're on benefits. And so we actually just did a training on Ticket to Work, and it's something that really, as a beneficiary, there's a lot of myths. That's a whole separate show, but there's a lot of myths about returning when you're on benefits. And we help collectively, meaning DRCVI, along with our what they call community work incentive coordinator out of Puerto Rico, to really give support, seamless support to those beneficiaries so they can make an informed decision, an empowered decision to say, yes, this is going to work for me. I'm comfortable with losing my benefits at some point in this process, and I want the support, and please help me find a Ticket to Work program. So that's something that DRCVI can do, again, as an employment advocate, is to be able to help you, because we don't endorse any programs, but we absolutely will tell you where you can find them, who serves the region, and in terms of different types of Ticket to Work program, because there's multiple formations of Ticket to Work programs. So those three right there, that vocational rehab, Department of Labor, and then again, if you're a beneficiary of Social Security, Ticket to Work, are three large programs that are right here in the Virgin Islands. And I do want to mention a supplemental one is the Island Therapy Solutions. They have what's called a supported employment contract, which means that if you're a person with disability who may need one-on-one in the workplace, even if it's just for transition or the onset of work, this is a great resource for you. Here in the Virgin Islands, it is very limited. And so if anybody's listening and wants to get more of a status of the support employment program, I would encourage you to call Island Therapy Solution to see where the status is, because again, they are the ones who will be providing the job coaches and work very, very closely, of course, with vocational rehab to do that program. So those are some of the resources for employees or job seekers. If you'd like, I can talk about the employers as well.
Okay. Well, one thing about the capacity of island therapy and voc rehab, I mean, about how many people can they serve over a period of time?
Well, it's a tricky question because it's always related to funding. It's always related to contracts. And I really couldn't give a guess. I mean, if we were at a nice capacity, meaning that we're mirroring what the community needs, I would say personally that we would need at least 10 coaches on each island just to start with. I don't believe they're at that number, but that doesn't mean at some point they can't reach that and then going to go further. So it's really going to be up to the relationship, the contractual relationship with vocational rehab, with Island Therapy Solution. I mean, if there's other folks who are thinking about wanting to, create job coaches and have a support employment agency, that's always an opportunity for people. Again, they'll be working closely with Voc Rehab because they're the ones who have the resources, the funds to be able to support employment, which includes the job coaches. So it's hard to say exactly what the numbers are, but I think if we look at what the needs are and try to match it as best we can, we're definitely looking minimally at 10 on each island, if not, in my opinion, 20 and 30. on each island. So we've got a ways to go.
Okay, another question I have, I'm always worried about it. Can you combine ticket to work with self-employment?
Yes. So self-employment can be had with Ticket to Work. Absolutely. And it's interesting because, and that's why it's so important to work with a benefits counselor, such as we do out of Puerto Rico, because they have all sorts of what they call exclusions. They have information related to taxes. They have write-offs, and they have that all that comes also with Social Security. So it's very complicated. That's nothing that I know that I could render. But again, we have folks who can help with self-employment. So self-employment is absolutely an option under Ticket to Work. We're seeing more and more of that as an option. And just to kind of tie it back to Voc Rehab. So let's say we have a person who wants to do self-employment, they're a beneficiary. They decide they're going to first maybe go to SBDC, the Small Business Development Center. They're going to go and talk to them and say, this is my business idea. Could you help me to figure out how to do a business plan and anything I would need to know? Because I advise people when you do self-employment, whether it's ticket or otherwise, and you want resources, you're going to need to show that you have a good, solid plan. And then what would happen next is that that person then could go to vocational rehab, express their goal as doing self-employment, and then once they're finished, they would still continue to be in a Ticket to Work program outside of VR so they could continue to get that ongoing support and also have access to the benefits advisor. Because again, as any business goes, it changes annually. And again, the benefits advisor of the CWIC is every year annually updated with certifications. And then of course, in terms of self-employment and the tax rules, SBDC is always good to make sure that they keep people up to date with that. So it's definitely a team effort for self-employment, but Ticket can be part of it. Voc Rehab can be part of it, and SBDC can be part of it as well.
Well, continuing along that same vein, what role can an employer play in that situation under apprenticeship principles?
Right. So if you have someone who, again, we can talk about Ticket first and then someone who's not a beneficiary. If you're a person who receives Social Security and wants to return to work, you would also mention about at times where people get injured at work and you have a workman's comp situation. So regardless of how they're coming back to work, they may have gotten on Social Security, have had different career, but then maybe want to use some of that institutional knowledge, that transferable knowledge into creating a business. And so they could then go into, so let's say the business, I'm sorry, you asked about apprenticeship, my bad. In terms of going back now to return to work into a situation where they maybe could not do, let's say this person was a welder, right? And they were, doing all sorts of stuff that was very physically involved. They became disabled. Now they go to the employer or they go to Voc Rehab and they say, I want to work, but I'm going to need some more training because I can't do the same type of work I did before, but I want to stay in the industry. So now they can talk to an employer or an apprenticeship program that can say, okay, this is for a welder, but due to disability, these are the duties of what they can do. And can apprenticeship help that? Now that's someone who's returning to work with a disability. Let's say this is someone who has a disability already and knows that they want to go into, let's say, carpentry, and they have a disability. So they don't have a lot of experience in it, but they know they're wired for it. They like it. They have a passion for it, and their disability isn't going to fully preclude them from doing this. They could go, then I would advise them to go to labor or to vocational rehab. They can go one of the two and talk to them about apprenticeship, see which employers are the receiving of the apprenticeship so that there is a full, and usually it's about 2 to 3 years of an apprenticeship program where there's an employer then waiting to hire that person. And so it's really in concert with Voc Rehab. Again, the public workforce is Voc Rehab and labor to be able to work with those employers who have those apprenticeship needs and be able to get fully funded. Again, that way the job seeker is not getting, kind of in debt over taking an apprenticeship because it can be very expensive. But again, with labor and VR, the resources can cover that. And at the end, hopefully they'll have an employer waiting for them to hire them right in.
Another organization you have been working with is My Brother's Workshop. Let the public know what they do and what's available for those with a disability.
Mhm. So my brother's workshop, of course, is heavily more present in St. Thomas and St. Croix, though they have a little bit of footing over there. So St. Thomas, my brother's workshop crew, recently have a campus they have built. And we've been there, we've seen the building, and it's absolutely wonderful. They're actually going to have the largest industrial kitchen in the Caribbean, 10,000 square feet. And this will ensure that some of the programs, in this case, the culinary arts program, will be a full-fledged program and be able to work with any kind of kitchen equipment, any kind of venue, whether we're talking banquets, we're talking, restaurants, whatever it is. These individuals are trained so that when they leave that program, again, with the culinary arts, they have so many opportunities, and also including baking, because they just closed their cafe and they moved it up to the campus. And so they're continuing to do that. So that's just one of the that's one of their biggest programs, is the culinary
All
arts.
right. I wanted to
Mhm.
thank you again for all the hard work you've given and making connections with all these agencies.
Mhm.
Disability Rights Center is certainly appreciated. I hope you in the future can find your dream agency that you always told me about. And again, stay in touch. We also have a website for the general public at drcvi.org. A lot of our information and resources are posted there. Make sure you contact us at info at drcvi.org. You can send in a request for information through the internet and email. And again, we appreciate the public in general, contacting us, getting information, scheduling for trainings and resources. And this has been Ability Radio. Signing off. Thank you all.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.